All right, everyone. We are here with Gavin Rothery, artist, designer, director, writer. The credits go on and on. Gavin, thanks for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. Nice to be on Starjump.
I know. Yeah, glad to have you. In our Starjump station open, we have the mighty Kraken fly by. So there's a little bit of you in the Starjump station open. Obviously, that's my favorite Star Citizen ship, which I'm sure we'll get to here in a little bit. But first and foremost, again, thank you for taking time to sit with us and chat with us. We obviously have a series of questions to ask you. Your career has spanned a bunch of different types of projects, and you've had a bunch of different roles in those projects. We probably don't have the time to cover your entire breadth of your career here. Obviously, since we have a lot of Star Citizen fans here, we want to focus on some Star Citizen work, but we also want to focus on your work on Moon because it's so memorable throughout just pop culture and stuff. And then as well as your another big one would be your feature film debut as writer and director of Archive. So that's something we want to cover too, and I'm sure some other things that you've done in your career will pop up just naturally. So if that's okay with you, we'll go ahead and jump into the questions here.
Yeah.
All right. And the first one's just kind of an introductory question here, and that's most people in our community know you from your work on Star Citizen, obviously as a concept designer. Maybe we have that credit wrong, but essentially a concept designer on ships. However, you've had a pretty wide-ranging career, like I've said, in the entertainment industry. Can you give us just a brief overview of who you are and what exactly you do?
Yeah, well, I'm Gavin Rothery. I have a dual career at the moment because what's been happening as my career's been evolving, I've been having opportunities open up that I've been taking all over the place, and it's basically taken me all over the place. It's not a straight through line. But the broad strokes are I graduated with a degree in graphic design, specializing in illustration. I wanted to be a comic artist, and that was my whole thing. Then the comic industry collapsed in the late 90s. Along the process, when I was at university, I fell into the orbit of a chap called Alan Grant, who was one of the creators of 2000 AD. Awesome guy, a writer. And he took me under his wing, and he was bringing 3 artists up over a kind of annual period, and I was one of his new artists, and I had a Batman book, and it was all lined up, and DC rotated the editors, and a whole bunch of new people came in, and they just took all the projects in progress, swiped them all off the desk into the bin, and started fresh. And Alan's 3 books with his 3 new artists he was trying to break were swept into the bin, and I was one of them. So I was going straight out of university, straight onto Batman, and then straight into the bin in a period of about 2 months. So my career was just going vertically straight up and then vertically straight down, which was a good primer for how things would go later on in the film industry. I mean, I'm sure anybody in any kind of area of the entertainment industry experiences those swings. Like, you can be really on a roll and it can all just go sideways or straight up or straight down. It's just the ride, right? The industry takes you on a ride, and you just got to be able to hang on basically over the duration. So that was me straight out of college. The comic industry kind of tended to bottom out around that period because Sony launched the original PlayStation and marketed it really heavily, made games very cool. The game industry went from 16-bit to 32-bit, everything went to 3D. All of a sudden, lots of game studios popping up all over the place, trying to create early PlayStation titles. So I found that the skills that I've been developing, trying to get myself ready to draw for 2000 AD, British comic that we've got over here. And basically, most UK comic artists grew up with 2000 AD. That was the kind of prime source of all of our comic love in the UK. We got American comics too, but I didn't really get those where I lived in Yorkshire. So my comic experience as a kid was the British sci-fi comic 2000 AD. So that was my whole dream, was work for 2000 AD. So then the games industry just really took off in the kind of late 90s. Lots of game studios popping up everywhere. So I found that the skills I've been developing for creating science fiction comics were perfect for the games industry. There was lots of design skills in there, draftsmanship. There was lots of narrative work, storytelling, just lots of the lots of the things that I was figuring out how to do for comics were very relevant in the games industry. So it was a very natural fit, but I didn't know anything about computers. And back then you couldn't go to university and learn how to use a computer. There's just nothing. Like the way you got on was by saving up money, buying a PC and trying to grab some hooky software from somewhere, wherever you could, and learning it and getting a job at the studio. So that was how I got into the industry. And then that got me in the games industry, which led me backwards and forwards, worked on all kinds of things, worked in studios. It was a weird period because studios would be around for like 6 months, 9 months, and then they'd go down. They'd get funding for a game and they'd assemble a team of about 20 people, get them working on a game. Then everything would go wrong because there was no kind of management practices in place or pipelines or any of that stuff. There was no licensed tools. Everything was bespoke and needed creating for each game from scratch. So it was a complete... it was a nightmare back then trying to get anything made. It was so hard. Everybody underestimated what was needed, both in terms of manpower and time. So invariably what would happen is you'd get a team set up with maybe 20, 25 people to create a game. They'd get paid from a developer to do that. 9 months in, a year in, get themselves really in the weeds, be in trouble, couldn't tell the publisher what was going on because it was basically the studio. They kind of didn't know how to do it really. Like nobody did. So what they'd do is they'd get another game project going, get another deal in, and then use the resources to try and finish the first game with a skeleton crew on a second game. And I remember the first studio I worked at, they ended up having 3 projects in development, and all they were trying to do was finish one. But they had like three teams on paper, but they were just trying to finish one. And it was just, it was just madness to watch it. But it was cool being in the middle of it all because these studios would be, someone would create a new studio. They'd be, because back then, like to get a game deal, all you really needed was some nice artwork. I've seen games deals done in the late 90s with like a really nicely printed double-sided piece of A4 paper, and I've seen that get like a £3 million game deal. Back as it was then with PS1 titles, obviously budgets were a lot smaller, but that was what you needed to do. You'd go in there, you'd talk your way in, you'd show some nice artwork and just promise the earth and you'd get the money. Right. So that was how, obviously now, you've got to do like sort of 60% of a game by virtue of a demo before you'll get a deal. You've got to have such heavy investment up front if you're a new startup, particularly before you can get that deal. If you're working on a new IP, you've got to really prove yourself. It wasn't really the case back then. Nobody did demos back in the day. Wasn't even a thing. So what that meant, it was bad because it meant every 6 months, 9 months, year, I'd be unemployed because the studio would go down. But it also meant that, I was in that time in my life where we'd just be going out drinking like 4 or 5 days a week. We'd be in the pub all the time, really social, really fun. Everybody knows everybody, all kinds of like, silly drunken nights in the pub going on. So when a studio went down, everybody scattered, got new jobs. But you'd still be going out drinking. So you'd meet all the people at the new studios. And so you'd meet your friends' friends. And then, somebody's studio will go down. You'd be like, okay, I've got a really good model. I've got a really good animator. You bring them in and so it was dead easy to get work because everybody knew everybody. And in that period, people that were around in that period tended to work all over the place. You either worked at a big studio and stayed there. I know Paul was with Epic for a long time because he was in a really great company. Epic's like one of the original great developers that became a huge behemoth. And he was lucky enough to be there back in the day when it was going through that whole process. I was like out, on my arse in London working. I worked at some big developers, but in the end, I just had enough of it. You're working for companies like Virgin and those studios are going down. And it's like, nobody's safe from this. Like nobody knows how to do this. So what I did was I had a bunch of friends that I've been working with. Everyone was getting really sort of, I don't know if I can swear, everyone was getting fed up with the way the industry was going. So I basically pulled everybody together and set up a company where we'd go in and we'd outsource as specialists doing there was kind of 2 SKUs. There was concept art and there was also game builds, like building models and stuff, like just building chunks of a game, basically taking care of chunks of development so that companies could outsource it, not worry about it, do their own thing. We would deliver chunks of the work that they needed to get the game finished. And so that was fun running that. But after we run it for a while, what happened was, firstly, that whole thing started to happen in the Eastern European market and the prices got really low. So it was really hard to compete with them. And then it started moving out to places like China. And by that time, I was like, I could see the writing on the wall and I was like, I'm going to get out of this. So the way to really concentrate is to specialize. If you want to as you're kind of moving through your career, invariably people tend to specialize. It tends to be the logical thing to do, because back in the day, I would do everything. It was much more like that back in the day. People would treat artists as a generic resource in a studio. Some people are good at animating, some people are good at this. And one of the things that I used to do when I started running teams was using people to their strengths rather than just saying, oh, because I used to work at a studio and, you'd have people say, all right, do some animating, do this, set up an animation pipeline. Okay, do some concept art, do some FMV work, which is cool and it's good to learn all those skills. But I started sort of trying to organize things a bit more, where I was like, well, this guy who sits next to me is much better at animating than me. He should be dealing with this, and don't give him a tank to design. I should be doing that, and it's like everything will get done quicker and better. And, I was trying to bring that kind of specialization into the pipelines. Obviously now that's completely standard, but back in the day, it was kind of a fight to get people to work like that. You had to have a lot of trust. And I was like a young artist, and it's like, why should anyone listen to me? And I had to make people listen to me, basically.
Yeah, I find it still today, actually, people get surprised because I work in the film and television industry, and people are always amazed that I do a little compositing, a little VFX, I do design, I do motion graphics, I do, you know what I mean? I have 6 or 7 programs I work into, when a lot of the young people nowadays, they are a modeler or a lighter or a sculptor, whatever that is. There's definitely a specialty there, and that's kind of the way the industries have started to move.
I remember I had an epiphany. It was a while back, and I was living with some friends, and we were sat watching TV, and a commercial came on TV, and there was a fad in the early noughties where talking CG animals were all the rage, and people were using them to sell products. So they'd have like a tiger, and they'd CG in a mouth, and they'd make him talk, and it was pretty cool for like a minute back then, when it came out. But it was a trend that lasted about 6 months, then kind of fell off. But there was a period where everybody was making animals talking commercials in the UK. And I remember we were sat in a lounge, and we'd been out to the pub, and we were all a bit drunk, and we were sat watching the TV, and this an ad came on, and I can't remember what it was for. It was like, if I remember rightly, it was like a leopard lying on a branch on a tree with a beach in the background, a beautiful blue sky. And this leopard sort of turns to the camera and starts talking. And it was just one shot of this big cat. Mm-hmm. And the whole kind of gimmick was it turns to the camera and then talks, and it's got like a human mouth. And I always thought they looked kind of goofy when they made like dogs and cats talk, because they've got those long mouths that open all the way down the side. So the only way you can anthropomorphize it properly is by just having a little mouth on the end talking. And it looks a bit goofy, I think, but that was what was going on. I remember watching it. My mate was sat next to me. He was always like really... He wasn't in the industry. Well, he was. What was he? I can't remember what he was doing. He was kind of getting into the industry, but he wasn't on the art side. And he was still kind of like sort of a little bit in awe of all of this like sort of magic you could do in a computer. And he asked me, he goes, could you do that? I was like, what? He's like, could you make that animal talk? And I was watching this commercial. I was like, yeah, I could figure that out. And I remember having a real epiphany, and I was like, but I don't want to. Like, that's a tough thing that they're doing here. And I could do it, but it would mean 6 months of R&D, or, just a whole thing to do that. And I was like, I really don't care about talking animals. Do you know what I mean? I love spaceships and cool guns and, speeder bikes. And, that's my thing. I remember after that conversation just thinking, I'm going to really kind of focus on what I'm doing from this point on.
And that's really cool, I think, is that you've been able to focus on the things you're actually interested in. You know what I mean? My wife who works, I was telling Paul, my wife who works in the industry, she's as a like head of production. She worked a long time for Frame Store, and there was a period there where she was talking about how animals talking and how that evolved. It eventually evolved to where they were doing entire digital head replacements of animals. And she spent a whole year one time doing digital head replacements on horses that were talking. And it seems so absurd when you step back and think about it, but they were big money jobs, and they were for big clients, it's just the way it was. So, real quick here to kind of keep us moving forward. So we'll start diving into some Star Citizen questions, but again, some of this stuff I think will relate just back to your just career as a whole, past experiences and stuff. But let's go ahead and dive in here for the sake of time. As I said, we just talked to Paul Jones recently about his new book, Game Artist, and we talked about just the process and stuff of being a creative in the creative industry. Yeah, I think I see it back there. I think I still have my copy right here. But since you have done so many ships for CIG, I think I'm thinking you're still the record holder here. Do you find it easier to anticipate the types of feedback from Paul or other decision makers at CIG, or does each assignment you get on Star Citizen, does it still present a unique challenge to you even today? Because as you just said, kind of segueing, you just said that you started to focus early on in your career on the things that you like, spaceships, sci-fi, all that stuff. So do you find the tasks from CIG to be easier now that you've done a lot?
No. Well, yes and no. They're easier in the way that, honestly, I've had a lot of clients over my industry, and CIG are the best clients I've ever had. Really, really great bunch, hardworking people, really, really trying to do something next gen. I mean, anybody who plays Star Citizen sees that, right? Like, they're really, really shooting for the stars with that game. And, Paul's a great bloke. I've known him. He's been my main point of contact through the whole thing. So me and Paul have been working together for must have been nearly 8 years now, a long time. So it's easier in the respect that I can talk to everybody and we can figure it out. It's harder in the sense that each ship does present unique challenges. There's often all kinds of little specific things that tend to come out once we've started working. So, and it's just the process, right? Different people work differently. But one of the things that I really respect about Chris Roberts is the way that he'll put his focus onto anything that he sees that he feels he's got thoughts on. So whenever there's feedback loops coming in, it's quite often he'll think of new things that he wants to do with something whilst we're underway with it. And there can be times where that means there's some extra late nights required to just make these changes, do this, do that. It's just part of what we do. But one of the reasons why I like working with these guys so much, like I say, is just how hard they're trying to make the best thing. And you can tell, when you look at the end result of a ship in game, you can see what has gone into it, right? I mean, we spend a lot of time working on them, a lot of resources go into making these ships, and you can see it. You can see that end effect in the game. And I mean, every time we get a ship delivered, I always my brain inevitably turns to this. And I've said this to Paul quite a lot. And I was like, it may be that a science fiction game, it may be that these ships are like peak starships because so much effort is put into them. It may be that there is never another game that's got this amount of time and love and care and resources put into realizing ships, and this many of them to choose from and play around with.
I'd even argue
this may be a starship.
I'd even argue to that point that not just in gaming, but even all media, television, film, and stuff, when a ship is developed for some sci-fi movie and that ship's going to fly by screen, they don't have to put the amount of effort that ultimately goes into some of these ships in Star Citizen, even into that, because maybe it's just background or it flies by and we don't really, the interiors don't actually have to fit within, you know what I mean? And so the level of thinking that seems to go into the Star Citizen ships seems to be on a whole nother level. I can't really imagine other than actual, car design and vehicle design in real world, anything comparable. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, they have the user experience that we factor in too. So whenever I have a starting process, whenever I create a ship, and it's a starting file, and my brief includes dimensions or approximate dimensions to fit in a hangar, basically. So the first thing I do is create the hangar as a grid on the floor and a vertical wall that gives me the volume of the hangar. And then I have a guy that stands in the middle of the hangar. And that's what I always start with, the same thing. I always start with a hangar size grid and a guy stood there. And that's the first thing that I ever start off with. And that guy stays in the 3D file as I work on the ship, and because everything's in 3D, right? So it's all, it goes into 2D later on, but all the actual design tends to be in 3D whilst we're getting everything, all the forms put together. And that guy is considered the whole way through, where the player's viewpoint is. I mean, we have a bunch of metrics that we use, such as, where handles are, how high steps are, tables, seats, all that stuff. So we have metrics files, which facilitate the in-game animation, so nothing changes. So, a ladder rung is always, 25 centimeters. An SCU cargo is always 1.25 centimeters cubed. Right. All these things are standardized, but we also have to consider the player experience. So when I'm designing a cockpit, I have a camera set up there, which is what the player's going to see, which duplicates the in-game camera. So when I'm figuring out how much glass is going in there and what the player can see and what, because it all has to work, right?
Right. So your character matches the field of view of the player character and all that type of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and like when I'm designing the interior volumes, I'll do fly-throughs where you can see the camera moving through, looking at stuff, and it gives you a really good approximation of the space a player will feel when they're in there.
Great.
So it's not just about trying to find cool shapes and stuff. You're also trying to figure out things like a nice flow, like a nice architectural flow through a ship between the cockpit, habitation, there's an engine room, cargo bay, whatever it is. So you've got a nice flow, but each section has got its own physical reason for being there that's very clear, but also hopefully something cool about it that gives it that kind of like sci-fi special sauce. There's lots of thinking that goes into this, but again, this is one reason why I really enjoy working with CIG particularly, because I get to kind of flex a lot more muscles and just like I get to work with like it's basically like set design, which spans over into my movie work with like Moon and Archive and whatnot. So there's elements of what I'm doing which is the production design job in a movie, but I get to keep all these muscles nice and exercised working on Star Citizen. It's cool fun.
Awesome.
So when you do start designing, you've kind of gone through the process that you go through. Ships like the Hammerhead, which one of my favorites. Do you do anything different than others? Do you have a process that you go through that differs from everyone else?
Honestly, I don't know. I don't really know what everybody else does. I've always kind of just, I don't know. I just do my own thing.
Have your process essentially.
Excuse me. I don't really look around at what everybody else is doing too much.
Yeah.
I just do my thing. I don't know. I've always been like that. I think what it is, when I was at university, I was learning to draw and paint. I always felt there was a real shame in copying. Like some people learn to draw by copying. I never did that because I just personally, do whatever you got to do. I'm not judging anybody for how everyone's working. But me personally, I always kind of felt a shame about that kind of thing. And we'd have tutors at college and they'd be like, yeah, just pick an artist you really like and like copy the work for 3 years. And I was like, I'm not doing that. I feel dirty. I just feel like I need to have a shower or something. It just didn't feel right with me. So I just never really... I'm just not really interested in other people's process because I've never really, all the way right back from the beginning of like before I actually started my career, I've just never had that. It's never had that line of thinking really.
And that's great advice. I think that kind of reinforces. I was just thinking about Ender's wife's painting that's behind him there, the Hammerhead. Trusting your own process sometimes, even if it's the wrong way of doing things or a different way of doing things. I know that when I approach some visual effects stuff for my day job, I'm probably doing it the harder way, but for me, it's the easier way. You know what I mean?
Right.
And we all have those different ways to the finish line. So, Starlet, do you want to grab the next one?
Sure. So you mentioned you do your concept work in 3D and then move some of that to 2D. So how do you decide what scenes or what narratives to create when you're creating your outputs from your concept work?
That's me and Paul talking, really. Excuse me. It's usually, there's often a requirement in the brief in what the ship does. So, for example, with the MISC Odyssey that we did towards, when was that? That was last year, and we did that middle of last year. The Odyssey is like a kind of a game ender ship. So it's basically an equivalent to the Carrack, right? So it's got mining, it's got refining, it's got exploration. You can load a rover in. It's got a 6-man crew. It's got decent sized turrets on it. It's got its own cargo, its own landing bay inside. It's got a small bay, so you can land a fighter or something like a prospector. So there's all kinds of when I'm designing ships, I always kind of think of it as almost like toys. I almost kind of think of it like toy design, where it's really cool if things move. It's really cool if it can, if it does cool stuff. Like if you got a toy, if you say, like, imagine if you were like 12 and you got one of these things for Christmas and it was like, 18 inches long and you could like fold the wings up and it went into battle mode or whatever, or open it up and there's a rover inside. How cool that will be. Trying to put some of that into the ship, big ramps coming down and extending, all the landing gears coming out and whatnot, VTOLs, all that kind of stuff. So usually when we get a ship brief through, there's a whole bunch of stuff the ship can do. There's usually like a kind of a USP to the ship, right? There's some kind of a unique selling point, like this ship can do this. Like, with the Kraken, it's a carrier, right? So it's got 2 internal bays, like 4. How many pads has it got? 3 or 4 small landing pads and 1 big landing pad.
4 small ones and then 2 mediums.
Yeah. That's right. It's two mediums on a big plane, right? But it's also got like the one variant's got like a market inside, like a dragonfly bay and all kinds of stuff. So when a ship comes through with those kind of briefs, it's like the Kraken's got a dragonfly bay. We're going to have a concept piece of the dragonfly bay because it's too cool to leave off. So, when they're doing the ship sale, they're going to want a cool image of the Kraken dragonfly bay. They want an image of the market. They want an image of the internal hangar. So usually that the list of what we need to do for the promo art is dictated by what the ship does. There's usually a couple of standards in there. Like there's one that me and Paul refer to as like full force, which is like all the weapons getting shot off or in the middle of a big fight and all guns and explosions. Yeah. So that's usually one we'll always have. There'll always be some kind of a pretty landed like a portrait almost, whether it's in a hangar or on like an external pad. They were like a nice portrait shot of the ship, or maybe two of those. Excuse me. And then we're usually into often there'll be a fleet shot where you'll be showing it with its companions in its same manufacturing line. So, or like to give some essence of its use, like in a convoy or something, so you can get a bit of a gist of, spirit of how it's intended in game. Like it's a fighter, you might have it attacking a larger ship with a couple of other fighters, things like that.
Yeah.
And then we're into the specifics, like it's mining, so we need a shot of it mining. It can hold a rover, so we need a shot of a rover driving out. Those kind of things. Okay, yeah. So usually it's informed because one of the things that's always a bit of a shame is when we get to doing the promo art, like when we were doing the Odyssey, it was a big old ship, and we were working on the design of that for about 4.5 months or something. And then we had a couple of weeks to do all the promo art, at which point we'd got a 3D ship that was all textured and nice. Excuse me. So it's been rendered out and then finished up in 2D in Photoshop. But you could just keep going. Like we got the ship, I had 2 weeks and created, 7 or 8 images. But if I had another 2 weeks, I might have been able to do like 20 images because we've got the ship there. And it's always just like, by the time you get to the end, I'm always just like, oh, it'd be so cool if you had one of it doing this, one of it doing that. And quite often I'll manage to stick an extra piece or two in there. If I've got a bit of spare time, I'll just do another piece and just like stick it on the end of the delivery because I've got a really cool angle that I like, or it just looks nice.
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to like get the extra image or two in there if I can, just to my portfolio.
Yeah. We, and real quick, just for everyone watching, Jared did a great I think it was Inside Star Citizen calling all devs with you, where they went through your kind of entire pantheon of ships that you've created for Star Citizen. It's an amazing episode. You should go watch it. Obviously, 2 ships that you were already worked on at that point, but hadn't been revealed, so they weren't brought up on the show, was the Odyssey and the Raft. Yep. So while we won't go through all of your ships by any means, I encourage people to go watch that Jared video to get the full rundown of ships. We will talk about the Odyssey and Raft specifically a little bit, but one thing I asked Paul about, and I was curious your take on it, was specifically in regards to the Kraken, just because I look at that as a really unique concept, phase, even just externally. Maybe it was the same for you guys, but externally it seemed different because not only did the ship get revealed with imagery, but there was a full trailer and, animation and this whole deal. And I think they ended up building a physical, miniature, for the event and stuff. So with the Kraken, being one of the largest ships in Star Citizen, probably one of the largest you've worked on, can you tell us a little bit about how you approached that assignment, and were there any unique challenges to the Kraken that aren't present in other ships, just based off the fact that it, was having this kind of bigger reveal? Did that factor into any of the concept work on those early stages?
The reveal's not really that big a deal when you're working on these things. Excuse me, because all I see is a deadline. That's it. Mm-hmm. So I have a date, I've got to hit, I've got to deliver, and that's all I really need to concern myself with. So all the other stuff that goes on after that, that's all being done by other people. So I don't really need to worry about that. I just get to kind of, go along to CitizenCon or watch it online or whatever's happening and just enjoy it all. So all I'm really concerned with myself is delivering, which will be a concept mesh of the ship that I've built, and a bunch of 2D imagery that will go with that. I know there's usually a bunch of other stuff that goes along, like supplementary work, like there'll be like animations and stuff I've done to show how the gears work, just whatever's going on with the ship. If it's got a special function or anything that moves or does anything, there'll be animation that goes with that too, to make sure it all works properly.
And this is this, we didn't write this question down on our list, but would that include things like, for the Kraken, for example, I remember when it was revealed, they showed off animation of its landing gears unfolded, which I thought was interesting because the landing gear actuation wasn't like shown in the trailer or anything. And part of me was like, well, this ship probably won't go into production for a long time. I wonder why they spent time on the landing gear animation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I had a really nice, I worked out a really nice animation for that.
It did, yeah.
There's like a, yeah. Sorry, I think I missed something there.
Is that animation process, though? Is that just part of the process of concept designing, like considering how it will move? Yeah. Yeah,
well, I have to, excuse me, there are a few different things that need to come into play when it lands. I mean, we always have a minimum 0.5 meter ground clearance, particularly on the smaller ships. On a bigger ship, I might go to maybe 3 or 4 or 5 meters clearance for things like rocks and terrain and stuff. We're just trying to keep our options open for the future and cause minimal headaches down the road. Yeah. So on really big ships like the Kraken, it's like 6 meters or something clear. It's like a lot of clearance, like you can drive under it and stuff.
Yeah.
So I need to factor that in. So I need the ships there. I need to have landing gear that look cool, that give that clearance, that can reasonably fold up. And for the engine, sake of the engine and caning people's graphics cards, usually, almost always, what we do with the legs is we fold them away and close some kind of a hatch. Mm-hmm. I think there are actually bits on the Kraken that stay exposed because of the Drake architecture and some of the cues that came from the Caterpillar. And so there are some bits that keep exposed, if I recall. I can't quite remember, actually. But it's a really important part of the design because I have to deliver a functioning ship. Yeah. So it's not just about doing something that looks fancy. It has to work. So working how the landing gear work, and all are also able to, because sometimes there's a lot of work has to go into it because you design the ship and then you set it off the ground and then you put the gear in and then you try and make the gear disappear into the ship. That's normally the first way into it. And quite often that doesn't work. So you have to look at work backwards and look at bits of the ship that could become landing gear or, how that whole thing works. And it's quite fun to do because it becomes like a puzzle almost, trying to make all this stuff work.
And with the Kraken, how much space the gears will take up inside of the hull of a ship sometimes.
All of a sudden, a gear falls up and it's crashing through an internal corridor, and you have to tweak the interiors. Lots of that stuff goes on, lots of backwards and forwards, pushing and pulling. And also with the Kraken, you've got things like the big cargo decks that come down, the ramp, the floors that drop down. So that's a whole other thing. And then you've got to get into got to be able to drive a rover into it. So you can't clutter the place up with too much stuff. You've got to have a clean on and off. You're looking at things like people driving forklifts, stacking cargo, all that kind of stuff. You need your fire line around the edge, so when the cargo's stacked and loaded, players can walk around it. Tons of stuff needs to be considered. But because I've been doing this stuff such a long time now, this is all usually considered. We know what all this stuff is, so it's not difficult to consider. And I can load all this stuff into my my original template file. So I start off, I've got my hangar grid and I've got my dude in the middle. And then it's okay, the ship holds 96 SCUs. So I'll pull in an SCU and look at different layouts for 96 units in different configurations and just set them off to the side. And then when I'm designing a ship, I can just pull in these volumes really quickly and make sure it fits. Just stuff like that.
Yeah. And kind of going into this process a little bit further, I know one thing you talked about with Jared and Paul on that episode was your love of cutaways, which, by the way, I've said this 1,000 times. I do think CIG needs to release a hardback concept art book full of cutaways. It would be an instant sell. But my parents were both in aviation, both pilots. My dad's a mechanic and stuff. I worked for big aviation companies, and I grew up around these aviation books that had cutaways that would show, all the internals of airplanes and isometric views and stuff. And I grew up on that stuff. And when I started to learn how to draw, I would draw like that. I would draw like submarines, but with cutaways, you know what I mean? So you could see all the levels and stuff. I was just curious, even if you're not, tasked with creating a cutaway for a ship, do you still sort of think about things that way? Are you always thinking about the interior? Is there ever a time where you're just thinking exterior when you're doing this concept work?
Yeah, we do. We do have a. There's usually a week. I just got to say, actually, what you said about how you started drawing. Then I did the same thing. My dad worked in the Merchant Navy and he used to bring all these naval charts home for me to draw on when I was a little kid. And my mum gave me an old fountain pen. I remember this when I was 3. 'Cause it felt really nice drawing with a fountain pen. And I used to draw ship cutaways. I remember doing this when I was 3. And I'd just do 2D from the side because that was kind of all I could draw. And I'd just draw all the decks and escape. I used to draw spaceships, like escape shuttles, like really massively complicated ships on these big bits of paper. Yeah, interesting that. Sorry, going back to where we're. So usually when we start the first week, it's just like try anything. And Paul will usually say, give me 4 or 5 completely different takes on what this ship might be. And so I'll just be keeping it loose and like blasting out all kinds of stuff. And then that then goes into a little bit of a churn where a couple of people talk about it at CIG, and it's like sometimes there's a thing there and it's like, yeah, this is the one. Sometimes it's like, that gives like Chris some new ideas, and it'd be like, actually try something like this, or it might be like take the back half of that and the front half of that, put those together, see what that looks like. So the first week, probably bleeding over into the second week, is that.
Oh, interesting. Let's swing over to one of those ships that at the time when you did that show with Paul and Jared, you couldn't really talk about, but that was the Odyssey, and that was sort of the big reveal ship toward the end of last year. That was a ship that got everybody talking. I think based off what I heard just amongst the community, it really reinvigorated people's love of MISC as a manufacturer, because it really felt like a bit of an evolution of the MISC design into something that really grabbed more people probably than something like even the Freelancer or something like that does. So with that ship, when you got that assignment, obviously without giving anything away that you're not allowed to talk about, but what kind of design goals did you get with that ship? And can you tell us a little bit about the process of your work on that one?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right about that. MISC was kind of like the ugly duckling a little bit. I think one of the things about Star Citizen, because it's been in development for such a long time, quite a lot of the early ships were MISC. And so the design sensibilities of the game as a whole have moved on a lot since those early ships, and there's been a lot of stuff that's been redone. And MISC basically needed a good look needed a good look at it, to try and kind of, like you said, to reinvigorate it. So that was a conscious thing that we were doing. It basically boiled down to just a lot of talking and trying stuff. I mean, it kind of comes down to the car design thing again, where you're just looking for those kind of key curves. I mean, the actual way that I designed the Odyssey, because it had a small hangar as part of the design, I had 2 initial hard restraints that were always going to dictate what that ship looked like, which were the hangar, which is a cube with known dimensions, and a pad size it needs to fit on, which gives it a length and a width. So those were the hard constraints. So I started designing the Odyssey with a cube, which was a hangar, and just put that right in the middle. So I had my grid of the hangar size, and then a cube of the hangar, which was going to go in the Odyssey, and just put that in the middle. And I was like, whatever I do, this cube needs to be basically hidden inside the form of the ship. The rest of the interior, we tend to spend a week or 2 on the exterior before we kind of really consider them. We block out a rough interior and we'll go backwards and forwards and things change. But when you've got something like a hangar, that has to, it's not going to change. Like the hangar dimensions aren't going to change. So you've got a big fat cube and your ship's got to be built around that cube. So it's one of those things where in some ways it makes it easier because it clarifies your thinking, because there's less choices you can make, but in some ways it makes it harder because there's less choices you can make, so you've got to make the right choices.
So in that regard, are you saying sort of it gives you a starting point?
It gives you a thing that you definitely have to do. We were playing hide the box basically when we were designing the Odyssey. We've got a big rectangle, a big cuboid, and that must be hidden inside the ship. Cool.
One other thing about the Odyssey is that do you think was there sort of an initial reaction with the Odyssey when you were going through that process, did you feel like that the Odyssey's design may maybe inform future MISC ships a little bit? Because as we hear from the community a lot, because the Odyssey comes up a lot lately, people really love the design of it. Probably more so than a lot of recent ships that have been announced in the last year, especially. Do you see that kind of maybe hopefully informing some future MISC ships?
It's bound to. I mean, they all do. I mean, there is a real evolution with the ships as you, as you see the. I mean, the Odyssey itself is an evolution, and this stuff, it's all conscious. It's like, we spend a lot of time trying to push things forward. The one downside of that is invariably that some of the older ships tend to sometimes not quite look as cool as the newer ones, and those invariably need a facelift. But that's just what happens when you push forward, right?
Yeah. Ender?
So you mentioned being asked for 4 to 5 ship variations of a ship design. Have you ever had a ship design of yours that maybe you liked one of the variations more than the others, but it didn't quite get the footing that you were hoping for?
Yeah, every time. Well, what it is, we design so much stuff. There's so much stuff that isn't in the game, and I always get attached to things. I mean, when I'm doing my own work, I'll only do one design because I'll be sort of honing in what I like as I go. But when you work for clients want different things, and so with CIG, there's a whole like let's just have a little look and see what's going on approach, which is just a different way of working, which is great. So that's how I work at CIG. When I was designing like the robots for Archive, I was just straight in and just like ding ding ding, this is it. Mm-hmm. So whenever I'm doing designs for CIG, I'm always getting attached to things because with the first one I do, I'm always like, whoa, I like that. That's a bit of a trick. So kind of detaching myself from that a bit is a bit tricky sometimes because, I mean, it's just the way it works. It's funny, me and Paul were talking about this, about how we should have like a lost level in Star Citizen where you go through a portal or something, it's full of all the ships that never made it.
That would be great.
That would be awesome.
Or it'd be great if there was just some, or if you could even if it was something more simple than that, like almost if you could go to like, the Crusader or the Drake or whatever the company is, you can go to their offices on whatever their manufacturing homeworld is, and there's some museum office of ship designs that never made it. That'd be great.
There's some really nice stuff. There's some really, really nice stuff that we've, it just didn't quite fit the bill. But a lot of this stuff comes up later on too, because we work using real-time board, and so all of our images are all laid out. So as we work, we've got a design. Like I communicate with Paul using Miro, which is like an online whiteboard. So I'll do a drop, and I'll put a bunch of images up, and then we'll have a Zoom call. And we'll talk about them. We'll have feedback chats, and we're all working on an online whiteboard, and everything just kind of moves sideways across the board. So as we start designing a ship, it just basically spreads sideways across this like huge infinite CG whiteboard, not quite infinite. And whenever we finish a ship, you can scroll out and you can see the whole design journey. And we've designed so much stuff now that we've got archives of these whiteboards, and you can just see all the journeys of it all with all the comments and thoughts and where it all went, and the exploration that went along, all kinds of stuff, color variations, paint jobs, all sorts of stuff. Sometimes I'll just be up at night and I'll just do a bunch of renders just because it's fun. I've got something that looks nice on my monitor and I'll just blast them up. It all just kind of lives on the whiteboard, and sometimes this stuff comes back. Like we'll look back to it, and it's all good stuff. It gets referenced later on.
I think the Star Citizen backers have really grown to appreciate how much work just goes on in the concept phase, because CIG has. I think there's a really smart decision by them because it allows us to get a peek in on the process. But they'll release in their subscriber vaults a lot of those early concepts, all the way down to even like some that are almost like just pencil sketches, but they reveal a lot of that stuff, and it's really illuminating to see where a ship started and where it got to. I think the Kraken was an interesting one for sure. I know there was originally designs, it was like dual hold kind of platforms, and I'm sure a lot of the other ships you've worked on have had that same sort of wild process, and it's pretty fascinating to see. Ender, did you have one more, or did we want to hand it off to Starlet?
Let's hand it off to Starlet.
Okay,
sure. Okay, Gavin, do you get to play Star Citizen, or do you get to follow the actual game to a point where you can see your vehicles flying around and and looking gorgeous. And how does that progress of the ship from concept to flight ready make you feel as an artist?
Well, one thing I'm very grateful for is the super talented team that does the builds, because they do a great job of translating the concept to the build, like always. Like, I hand over a concept model, which it's the ship, but it's all got geometry crashing through. It's nowhere near game ready. It needs rebuilding. It's there, but it needs rebuilding before it will work. And the grind that these guys put in is just phenomenal, and I really appreciate them because they make me look good.
Yeah,
thanks, guys.
I guess
thanks, everybody. Thanks, CIG.
And then, I guess that would be like John Crew's team and all that, and the vehicle production crew. Yeah,
they're great. So I follow the game's progress more than I play it. I do dip in and out, but to be honest, I haven't got time. I mean, Star Citizen's, it's your second life, right? If you're doing it properly, I haven't got time.
Yeah.
But so I tend to follow most of it online. I watch a lot of YouTube videos, keep abreast of things, follow people on Twitter. It's always just so cool how receptive people are to the work. Really appreciate it.
And I guess it's kind of cool nowadays. It seems like since whatever point that was, Paul kind of mentioned this, that, a lot of the ships started getting designed initially to metric and stuff. We're now seeing a lot of ships go through the production pipeline and go flight ready, and they look almost identical to the concept art, you know what I mean? And that's really cool to see. Obviously there's been some outliers like the Carrick and stuff that had to kind of change, but a lot of those are those early designs before a lot of that stuff was set into place. So for those of us that really get attached to the concept art, and that's our entry into the ship, that's why we buy into it, that's why we back the game to get this ship, it is really, really cool that CIG is doing so much work now to stick to that concept, the look of the concept art. And again, I think that's a big testament not only to the concept artists like yourself for working within those metrics, working within those walls, but also to John Crew's team for having to match that and stuff. So it's really cool. So
do you have a particular design aspect or an item that you put in every one of your ships as kind of a signature?
But a lot of it tends to get knocked out at the early. I think probably the thing that tends to go in there the most as a consistent one would be the graphic design. So all the little icons and stuff, that all comes from, my semiotic work that I did on Moon and followed through onto Archive and stuff. So I love doing little graphics and stuff. I can do little square symbols.
It's amazing the amount of personality that can inject into something. You know what I mean? Which was very obvious in your film work, how those graphics played a role in personality. But even on ships and stuff, it's amazing how those little details sometimes can flip a ship's personality.
I've always loved graphic design, and it's one of those things that comes quite naturally to me, so I can do it quite quickly. Yep. So I always find that things don't feel like they're finished unless you've got a graphic design kind of pass over them. Mm-hmm. So I think this is one of my I think with artists generally, after you've been working for a while, you tend to get like an extra kind of skill that you can bring. And I think one of mine is the graphic design on top of the actual concept. Mm-hmm. And I mean, you'll see that through my work, right? It's just kind of always there.
Yeah.
So
it's actually, there's actually a reason why I do that. It's because it's relaxing. Mm-hmm. It's like if I'm doing like a movie, doing all the graphics for the walls and stuff in the middle of pre-production, doing the graphic design is actually very relaxing. And like when we did Archive, we're out in Hungary and we were, the set's getting built. There's a lot of pre-production going on, and I'd be staying in my hotel room till 2-3 in the morning, just doing a lot of graphic design work on my laptop, and bringing it in the next day. And it was a lot of work. But I remember having a chat with the line producer. Was getting a bit worried about me when she found I was doing this. She was like, "We can get people to do this." And I was like, well, you can't, because it's art. It's not, you know what I mean? There's an art thing going on here that I want in a certain way. And besides which, this is how I chill out. Like I'll go home and I'll do this at night to chill out in the hotel. Yeah. And they didn't quite understand what was going on. They were like, they were just, okay, fine, whatever. And it's because I always find there's two types of work, right? When you're really in the zone, there's work that tires you out and work that kind of fires you up. Like some work, like the more you do it, the more fired up and energized you get. And so I find that, I mean, graphic design particularly is one of those types of work where I'll just get excited and kind of get into it. So yeah, I tend to do a lot of my graphic design work mainly just to relax.
Cool. So, for the sake of time, Gavin, we want to move off into your film work here, but we'd had one last Star Citizen thing we want to do. We picked a few of your ships, and we wanted to just get, and we just wanted to say the name of the ship, and maybe you could just say, one quick, maybe just a sentence or two memory of its creation or anything that stuck out to you that was kind of interesting about that process. Obviously, the first one that's top of mind right now is the ship that everyone's flying right now, and that's the Ares Starfighter. Any specific thing about that ship you walked away with?
Yeah, I should have had a bigger gun.
Fully agree. Size 7's not enough.
It was a size 8 at one point.
Yeah. Oh, was it?
Yeah,
that's
if I
very
remember rightly, was it? It'll be in the design. I'm pretty sure that at one point it was a size 8.
Oh, wow.
It was just a gun. It was a gun with some wings on it.
Yeah.
So cool.
Very interesting. Hammerhead.
Oh, Hammerhead. What's to say about the Hammerhead? Oh man, those turrets were a nightmare to make work. But I am ever grateful to the design, to the actual programming team for getting those turrets working, because the requirement was like just for complete coverage, and they needed to be able. They had this new funky mechanism that no turret had done before, and it was quite a lot of can't do that, and the programmers got them working. So
yeah,
thank you, programming team.
Drake Kraken.
Drake Kraken. Oh my god, the interior of that ship broke my brain, like designing that interior. It was so complex. Did you work
on the cutaway for that? That there was a cutaway, but it was almost like a 2D, like kind of just art cutaway.
Mm-hmm. Paul put that together, but it was I did all the geometry and stuff, and he did the Photoshop. I gave him a bunch of renders, and he did the cutouts and stuff.
Very cool.
How about the RSI Perseus?
Thank you.
That wasn't mine. The Perseus. Oh, of course it was Perseus gunship. Yeah. That was originally called a gunboat when we were working on it. Perseus. What am I say about the Perseus? Yeah. Why do we have to have a ship that kills a hammerhead? Right. The hammerheads are one of my babies. I had to do a concept piece with a hammerhead. It's snapped in half like a biscuit.
Yeah.
It's
like I will say,
I love the hammerhead. I'm really attached to it. I don't want to do a burning hammerhead.
I will say in my Aegis cinematic, my fan cinematic, I did allow the hammerhead to get some revenge on the Perseus. But
yes.
One thing I will say, and I know I don't even really bring it up because I'm sure no one's really allowed to talk about it because it hasn't been revealed yet, but we know that the Polaris went through redesign. And one thing I will say about that is while the backers haven't seen that yet, and I'm sure they're waiting for the appropriate time, I really hope the Polaris takes a lot of design cues from the Perseus, because the Perseus, when I saw the reveal of that really reignited my love of RSI design, probably more than anything. So I really hope the Polaris redesign, when we eventually see that, I hope it carries a lot of that DNA from your work on the Perseus. So nice job on that one.
Yeah, the Hammerhead's been one that I wanted for a long time, and the Perseus kind of didn't replace it, but has taken a place right beside it for me. Yeah. So,
Starlet, you want to grab the next two ships?
Oh, yep, sure.
Actually, all the rest of them. Grab the rest of them.
The Mole.
Oh, the Mole. Probably my favorite concept piece I've done for CIG was a cutaway for the Mole. It was done in 8K, and it was a pleasure to work on. It was just this beautiful 8K, insane level of detail. I just got to stay up night after night, getting right in there. Like I love detail work, and that I got to really run riot on that cutaway. So that was, when I think about all the work I've done for CIG, that's the one that I had the most fun doing.
Big standout, yeah.
Okay, and how about the raft?
The raft. I got to shout out the coders where they got the engines and the legs working, because when I designed that, they basically said it wouldn't work. and Paul was like, make it work, please. And they made it work because there's a double pivot. There's the when it lands, it needed to basically look like an oil rig, like we were trying to make it like a Space Invader. It's got that kind of look about it. Yeah. The guys from Tron, the recognizers from Tron. I was trying to get a little bit of a recognizer in there,
totally,
like an Argo recognizer.
That's really cool to think about that reference. I love the raft's design and really hope the Argo SRV pulls from its design a little bit. So I know the SRV is going into like flight ready production, I think, according to the roadmap. So I would love for it to pull some of that DNA from the raft. I think the raft was a big success, especially interior. Just unbelievable.
That was fun doing the interior for the raft, actually. It was a good one.
One more from me. One of my favorite ships. Looks-wise, the Prowler.
Alien ship, right? Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, the Tavarin Prowler. The initial one for that was a little bit of a team effort. That Jan Urschel did some initial sketches for that. So I was working towards an initial Jan Urschel sketch. So I've got to shout out Jan for that. That wasn't completely pulled out of the ether. The Prowler was a cool one because it was the first time I got to do a ship without considering the cockpit, which back in the old days before I worked for CIG and before we had this whole reality where the player sits in a seat and the camera's right where his eyes are. There's no faking anything. All the volumes work. There's no magic going on. It's all, everything's kind of realistic. Before we did that, I've designed a lot of ships for other games before, and it would always be just like make it look cool. But working on Star Citizen, you have to have a functional cockpit that a pilot can, or multiple crew members can sit down in and see what they need to see, have a cool experience. And it dictates a lot about what you can see and how you kind of deal with glass or transparent surfaces. And the Prowler was the first one where I didn't have to worry about that because we had the Tavarin tech where we could, have the transparent metal. So that was just a real pleasure to not have to think about cockpit visibility for once.
Interesting.
So that's pretty much it for the Star Citizen questions, Gavin. I really appreciate you answering those in as much depth as you did. So we really wanted to go over into some other aspects of your career. And one of the biggest ones I think people know your name by, and where kind of for a lot of people that connection to you started was Moon. I was actually in a big inspiration meeting at my company yesterday, and I brought up Moon, and everyone in my studio literally started chattering about it instantly because it's just a fan favorite, I think. Can you tell us a little bit about what your role on Moon was? I think, are you officially listed as VFX supervisor, or were you art department?
Oh man, it was all over the place. The reason Moon came into existence is because, I was talking before about all these games companies I was working at. That's where I met Duncan Johns in like 98, I think it was. There was a chap who had a games company called Elixir Studios. It was owned and run by a chap called Demis Hassabis, who since has gone on to create a program called DeepMind, which he sold to Google and has then created AlphaGo. No, DeepMind's a company, AlphaGo is the product, which is a bit of AI software that took on the global Go champion. The board game Go. Took on Lee Sedol and kicked his ass, basically. Wow. It was one of those things where, back in the day, people used to say, no one will ever create a computer that will beat a human at chess.
Right.
And then in the 80s, we had Deep Blue versus Garry Kasparov, and that paradigm shift occurs. Well, after that, the big one was Go. It's like, because it's infinitely more complex than chess. And it's like, it will never happen. And Demis is the guy that did that. But Demis, that all happened over the last few years. Previously, he had a games company that he set up because Demis originally did Theme Park when he was 15. He made Theme Park with Peter Molyneux for Bullfrog. So he got started really early. And he's one of those, he's just a really smart guy. Anyway, I was running the art team at this company called Elixir Studios, and he hired Duncan in, who nobody knew at the time, as a writer to work on some of the story. Because we're doing a game called Republic, the Revolution. It was like a political simulation set in Russia. So it was a crazy, crazy expansive project that never quite ended up working out because the concept was a bit too far ahead of where computing power was at the time. But we ended up becoming friends with Duncan. I didn't know who he was for like a year. I knew who his dad was for like a year. We was just Duncan from work. And we started hanging out, and he was just finishing film school. and he had a thing where he'd finished all of his school, so he'd finished all of his lectures and all of that stuff. But it was a London Film School, and you don't graduate till you deliver a short film. And so sometimes people finish all the courses, go off into the industry, and don't deliver a film for years. So they don't actually graduate until like years later. So he was looking for a short film he could do, and he wanted to do something sci-fi. So at the time, I'm working in the games industry. Back in the late 90s, the computing the expectations of game art was much different than it is now. Like, you're creating characters of like 250 polygons. That's your character for your game. So I was always, excuse me, I always felt like I was swimming in the shallow end of the 3D software. I was working in 3ds Max at the time, and I've got all these tools available to me, but I was always swimming in the shallow end with the modeling and texturing requirements and the animation requirements that were needed. So I'd always play with the bigger tools at home. Excuse me. And we just started hanging out.
Cool.
He wanted to do a sci-fi short film. I was like, hey, why not do a bunch of visual effects for you? That'll be fun. And we ended up, I was living with a couple of friends in a house in Wimbledon. He ended up moving in with us. And we just lived together for 10 years. And he was always like, I want to do a film. So we had a couple of false starts, but I was like, I'll team up with you. We'll do a film. It'd be so cool. We'll do a sci-fi film. And after like years and years of false starts and trying to get this and that and the other done, we eventually managed to get Moon made.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just, Moon was basically me and Duncan just living at home, just trying to make a film.
Oh, that's really cool. Yeah, I love Duncan Jones as a director, and he seems like such a humble, cool dude. Even when he was working, I was watching a lot of documentaries on his Warcraft film, because me and Ender played a lot of Warcraft. We're big fans of it. So obviously when that movie was in production, and it was so crazy because it was such a huge production, obviously a ton of money behind it and stuff, much, but he almost had this like appearance of like a guy just sort of making a movie out of his backyard. Like, it was still, you're still so down to earth and humble in all the documentaries and behind the scenes videos. It was really cool to see. So.
Yeah, well, that was where we all started out, in a house in Wimbledon, just trying to make a film.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that was cool. I mean, well, that was all back in the day where we were trying to get our careers started. So that was when I started my company, and it was great because I could hire people to work on jobs and then kind of step aside a little bit and work on things with Duncan. And so we were trying to just get going. So it went from doing free music videos and spec commercials to try and get a reel together, through to doing like low-end pop promos when they were a thing. And then we eventually got a bite and did a couple of really big commercials. And then we got to make Moon. So we were kind of working our way up the ladder, but we always worked as a team. And it's one of those things where we just had the same interests, and, we're just talking about how we're going to do it all the time. And so we'd basically just be playing Counter-Strike with all our computers connected in the lounge, and just trying to make a film.
Cool.
Yeah. What was the most difficult part of working on Moon for you?
There was a lot of agony early on, just trying to get things moving. I mean, how we did it, we originally thought we might be able to figure out a way to get £250,000. So we thought, let's try and figure out a way of making a film for £250,000. So let's just take everything from that starting point. So we had a big chat, and I basically outlined a bunch of stuff. It's like, we're going to want to do like a sci-fi piece. So, I mean, bear in mind, we shot Moon in 2008. So when we were doing most of the putting together of everything was like 2006. And then we kind of properly managed to get into pre-production in 2007. We built the sets just before Christmas 2007. So the back half of 2007 was when it got serious. So up until that point, up until mid-2007, it was just really difficult because we were just trying. And when we had a couple of false starts where we had projects we were trying to push that it sounded really good and just didn't get off the ground, and we thought it was going to. And after that's happened a couple of times, you can get quite dispirited, and it kind of feels like, this is the last time we're going to ever be able to try this. And it isn't, of course, but it feels like it. So we had a big chat, and it felt really desperate. I remember it was me and Duncan sat in the lounge, and we were like, how are we going to do this? Like, how are we going to figure this out? So we had a chat. It was like, okay, it's like, how much money might we be able to get? And it's like, we might be able to get £250,000 if we just pull out all the stops, talk to everyone we know, get lucky, get a BAFTA, whatever. Just do whatever we can. We're resourceful guys. Maybe we can get £250,000. So let's try and figure out a way of a film we can make for £250,000. So I grew up on all the old vintage sci-fi stuff that my dad showed me, like, you know, Outland and Silent Running and whatnot. So that's always informed my take on this. And I also grew up reading Cinefex magazine, which is all the old stories about how everything's made using practical sets and miniatures and whatnot. So I feel like I understand all of that stuff. And all the early stuff we were doing together, like his graduation film and stuff, was all very kind of knockabout, just grab some stuff and get it done. So, you know, I've been making props by just, you know, taking a vacuum cleaner apart and gluing a bunch of things together and painting it. And it's like, hey, there's your science fiction bazooka. And it looks quite cool. And it's like, oh, hey, guess what? Now I can make props. And I just sort of started doing all this stuff and it just worked. So we had a big talk and I was like, look, let's just box ourselves in with some restrictions here. So we're doing an old school sci-fi film because we can't afford new production techniques. We can't afford CG. We're going to have to build a set, put a guy in there. That's basically it. So what I did was I outlined a bunch of ingredients that would make it feel like an old sci-fi film. So it's like, we'll have the guy stuck somewhere. So he's on a station or a satellite or a ship or something, but he's stuck somewhere. So we'll have one character and we'll figure out a really good reason why he's stuck there. We'll give him a robot buddy that we'll make out of a plastic box, because that worked in the old movies, that we can do that. We'll get a nice voice for it and that'll work. Doesn't have to be much. Probably the less it is, the better. Like, we shouldn't try and do too much. So when I was designing Gertie, I was like, Gertie is just a PC with an eye semi-reminiscent of HAL to give it a little bit of a vibe. So you might feel like he's evil when he isn't. So all of that stuff was like, I'm going to deliberately play the design down because, you know, I'm not going to try and design something that looks like it can do all of this fancy stuff, because we obviously can't. So Gertie was basically a PC, one of the old beige box PCs. And I had a big beige tower that was covered in Post-it notes. That was my work machine, which is why Gertie is a box covered in Post-it notes, basically, and coffee stains. It's my old PC. So I've come up with a bunch of like things like, we've got a guy stuck somewhere, sci-fi setting, he's got a robot buddy, he's got a job where he has to drive around in some kind of a truck or buggy, because all those old films tended to have that kind of thing going on. And yeah, we'll come up with a really good reason why he's stuck. We'll have an evil corporation as a baddie, because those are like great classic sci-fi baddies, right? You know, you have like the corporation who's only in it for the money, and people are getting screwed over somehow. So we have these ingredients, and let's do a story with these ingredients, and it should feel like an old sci-fi film. And so we had a good think about it, and quite quickly came up with Moon. And one of the really cool things was Duncan managed to get the ear of Sam Rockwell. He flew out to New York, where Sam lived at the time. I had a big old chat with him and managed to persuade him to do it. And so that was basically how Moon got put together. But awesome. When we were having that chat, when I was outlining all of these things, that came from desperation, and that felt really bad because we felt like we were screwed. And it was that me coming up with that laundry list that eventually, well, quite quickly manifested into Moon, was me feeling like we were screwed, and we had to, like, don't waste any time thinking about things that aren't relevant. Let's constrain our thinking inside this. Just a list of things that should give us something that feels like we want to do. And it totally worked. And then from that point on, we had that chat in that evening. And then once we felt like we'd got a kind of a target that we were going for that was kind of quite tightly constrained, we made a pledge to each other, and we said, look, we're going to start this now, and we're going to move forward as if we're making this film, and we're just going to act like it's all moving forwards. We're going to work like it's just all happening. And it ended up playing out like that.
That's so cool.
So cool.
I wanted to segue into archive a little bit, because again, we could talk to you for hours about Moon and all your projects. They're so fascinating. But, you know, it's kind of an interesting segue into archive, because I could see all the different roles you played in Moon, everything you just sort of walked through, and it was almost like you essentially were almost playing the role there of, you know, a filmmaker at that stage already. Yeah. So then, you know, my next question was going to be, what led you to want to direct your first feature film, and that, you know, feature-length film, and that being Archive? Was that just a natural progression from you from your film work and stuff like Moon right on into Archive?
Yeah, I've just done so much stuff. I just felt like I could do it, and it's like, why not take a shot?
Yeah. And remind me again, Gavin, what constitutes a film being a feature length film? What requisites does it have to kind of hit that?
I don't know what the precise definition is. I mean, normally you tend to think about the classic feature would be in a cinema. It's like a feature presentation, and it's in a cinema being featured to an audience.
Yeah.
So I think it probably has I think it's a theatrical release.
Yeah.
Which is annoying because when we did Archive, we actually sold that film out globally, and we had when I say selling out, what I mean is the world's divided into territories. And when you finish your film and deliver it, you do a bunch of sales deals with all these different territories. And I can't remember how many there is. There's quite a few. We sold the film for a theatrical release to every territory in the world, which means you sold out, which means there's no more deals to be done. So that was fantastic because we actually Archive had a theatrical release globally. And then the pandemic came and shut everything down. So I got really robbed of that. Yeah. But Archive should have been a global theatrical release.
Oh, yeah. Well, I will say it's a stunning film. It's actually really one of my favorite sci-fi films of like probably the past 10 years. It's really, really well done. I know, Andrew, you had a series of questions about it.
Oh, yeah. This is a film that's on my top 10 list for sure. And I watch a lot of movies. So did you find putting your writing on film a little bit, I don't want to say scary, but at the same time, was it a daunting idea for you? Or
because you wrote this film too, right?
Yeah.
Was this written with the intention of putting it on film? No,
I tried not to write Archive. I know that might sound a bit strange, but one of the reasons why it took me such a long time, because I had the idea for Archive down in 2011. It took me a long time to get that film made. We shot it at the end of 2018. So there was a long period where I was trying to make that film. And when I say I was trying to make it, I had a production company attached really early on in 2011. And what happened was I spent like 5 years trying to get that film written. And I worked with like 3 different writers and they just weren't bringing it at all. It's nuts. I mean, my whole thinking was I'll come up with the idea for the film and then I'll work with a writer. I'll tell them what I want the film to be and they can give me a script and work together. Yeah. Script, make a film. Now, the reason why I didn't set out to be a writer is because I already do a lot of different types of art, right? I do concept art, graphic design, VFX. I do a lot of stuff, right? Motion graphics, previs, compositing, like all sorts of stuff. So I was a little bit apprehensive about just strolling into another artistic field that I'd never worked professionally in before and just expecting everything to be fine. You know, like I'll just stroll in. It's like, I don't know how to format a script. I don't use Final Draft. Like, I know there's a bunch of rules I don't know. There could be all kinds of other stuff that I don't know that I could probably expect would be a problem. I've never done it before. There's no real reason why anyone should take me seriously. I mean, I've always been like an ideas guy, but there's a lot of difference between having some ideas and delivering a finished script.
Right.
Gulf there. So what happened was I spent like 5 years trying to work with some different people, and I just got unlucky. I had terrible things happen. I was working with I was just trying to be patient and do the right thing. I was working with a writer, and she got pregnant and she went off and had a baby, and it's like, that's cool, but I had to wait for 18 months. And then when we got back again, she delivered a whole load of work, and it just wasn't right. The characters were off, and it was weird, and we had to part ways. I'm just wasting a lot of time, basically. There was one guy that we worked with, who will remain nameless, who basically he was on the project for a year. He took half his fee in advance, just disappeared.
Right. Oh.
Never got a word off him. Cost us thousands. So that's me wasting a year right there with that guy. Never got a written word. Lots of meetings in pubs and stuff. Always meet up at the pub and get his lunch paid for and have a chat about it. Never got anything. Yeah. Just saying back to me things I've already said to him at the previous meeting. Anyway, in the end, I was in a dark place. I was so fed up. Similar to where we were with Moon, I was like, this just isn't going to happen. And so I'd been writing a treatment, and I've been trying to figure out how to write a treatment, because no one tells you this stuff. Like, how do you write a treatment? You can walk into Waterstone's bookshop, and there's a whole shelf. It's like how to write a movie, book 2 inches thick. People you've never heard of wrote these books. And I'm just looking at it. I remember going into Waterstone's. I was like, right, I'm going to do this properly. How to write a movie, how to write a movie, how to write a movie, 2-inch books. I'm looking at it thinking, that ain't it. Like, whenever someone's got something good to say to you, they can normally sum it up in a sentence or two, usually. If they know what they're talking about. And I'm leafing through these books, and I'm just like, God damn it, I'm not reading this. Like, this isn't it. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not reading 2 inches. it's just padding and fluff. And you can tell it's like, I want a book that's like 5 millimeters wide, like a little small format book, like a big pamphlet that just tells me the important stuff. Because that's what this 2-inch book is. It's just got a whole bunch of other stuff in there that's going to suck my energy and life force trying to get those little bits out. So I turned my back on all of that and I was like, I'm just going to figure this out. But what I'd been doing is writing a treatment. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to write like a précis version of the story. And I can hand that over to the writer. And I'd been working on this for so long because every time I had a meeting, I'd try and put more detail in. And I got to a point where I'd got a 47-page treatment. Now, when you're writing, there's a rule when you're writing where you will go on the assumption that 1 page of your script is going to be 1 minute of your screen time. So however many pages your script is, it tells you how long your movie is going to be. And it's a good read. Gives you a really good idea, right? So if someone gives you a script to read and it's 152 pages, you know that's going to have to change. Stuff's going to have to get cut. Because right there, you've got a 2.5-hour movie. And that's just off the page. You can put an extra 10 minutes on for, like directorial flair and transitions, whatever you want to do. Like bits where people aren't talking. This is the talking, like most of it. So, you're looking at a 3-hour movie there, and it's like, it's fine if you're Steven Spielberg and there's something you really want to do with that. But you're getting pressure from everybody at that point. Distributors don't like 3-hour movies because they get the same money for a ticket as they will with an 18-minute Pixar movie. So they'd rather show two screenings of a Pixar movie than 1 screening of yours because they get twice the money. So everybody likes shorter films, at least with the old theatrical model. So my treatment was 47 pages long, and this is me skimming over bits, but there's chunks of dialogue and stuff in there. And it occurred to me, all I really got to do, because this is what I want to film, this is the film, all I've got to do is just kind of rewrite it nicely, and it'll pretty much be the script. So I was like, I'm just going to do that. And my kind of deal with myself was, I'm going to write it, and with the production company was, I'm going to write this, and if we can find someone better to work with, at any point they can take it over. But until then, I'm going to write it and push it forwards. And they were like, yeah, fine. So that's what I did. And it took me about 2 months to get my first draft together. It might have been less than that. It's quick. It was about 6 weeks, I think. And I had my script. And I was like, wow, I've just gone from literally years of just agonizing and waiting to making a script in 6 weeks. And it was pretty good. I did a second pass on it. And it didn't change much, but a few things changed. And the second pass was basically the shooting script. The trick I found with writing is you need to give yourself time to forget what you've done, because you finish a draft and then you can't keep working on it straight away. You need to put it aside and have a couple of weeks at least where you just don't even think about it. And then when you read it, I've got this thing that I kind of call cold brain energy. And it's basically when you come at something with a cold brain and you've forgotten it, and you can give it a real appraisal, because you've got to appraise your own work, and you can only really do that with fresh eyes. And with writing, you're so kind of in there, and it's such a consuming process that you need to step back and forget about it. So anyway, that was how I ended up writing Archive. And then I did that, and all of a sudden it was like, okay, I've just figured out how to take my ideas, which I've just been writing in random lengthy Word documents, into a final draft script. It's like, I'm not saying it's easy, but if you've got all the ideas there and you can hear the characters talking to each other in your head, you can write script. Yeah. That's all I did.
So did you take any design inspiration from your work on Moon and your previous works, or did you have a different visual ideal in mind for Archive?
It was like a next level up, really. My original thought was to do Archive 2. So it had because it's one of those things where I felt like I needed to have a strong link to my old work so that people could join the two things together.
Sure.
It just felt important to me. I don't know. So, and it's just the kind of style I like. It's like I like that kind of stuff. It's where my brain naturally goes. So I was doing a lot of things different with Archive, but I came at it from the same place, but just with more experience and knowledge. So, for example, with Archive, I was very keen to try and get more of a sense of a visual journey, even though the set was quite small. Mm-hmm. I was being quite bold with the use of color. Like when we were building the set originally, everything was going to be white like Moon. And then I was walking around, I was like, no, I want this room orange, this room yellow, just like proper full signal yellow. Yeah. This is where the robots sleep. And it's like I put big black graphics on the walls. It'll look really cool. And just did that. and it gives it more of a sense of journey. Like when you're moving around the set, you can feel the different rooms have got a bit more personality. If everything was just painted white, like the main corridor, it would have been, if it was all black and white, I think it would have felt a bit more samey. There's pluses that would have come with that, because it would have made it feel a bit more discombobulated, possibly, which could have worked. But I just wanted to try out the colour thing. One of the things I find really interesting about Moon, I remember it was on TV one time, and I was doing a little tweet-along thing just for fun and chatting to some friends on Twitter and just people that were watching the movie. And I got a bunch of people on board, and the movie finished, and I said, "Okay, who can draw me an overhead map of the Serang base?" Like, because I find geography really interesting, in the sense of space that you take away as a viewer, and the sense of space that I intend to put in there as a filmmaker, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I appreciate geography of movies. I appreciate knowing where I am and knowing what's going on. And I got back like 30, I think I got 37 drawings of the moon base. None of them were right. Some of them were crazy different. It's like always like corridors and stuff and rooms that don't exist. And it's like, how on earth did you think that? This is all people, like, once the movie's finished, it's like, just because it's not a big base, right? There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms in the base. It's basically 5 rooms and a big corridor. And some of the stuff I was getting back was nuts. It was like really complicated.
I feel like Archive, from my memory of what you see, I feel like it is a corridor with 3 or 4 rooms off to the sides, and not much more.
I did make a loop in there. There is a bit where the set goes around in a loop, so you could, like with Moon, as one corridor, everything was an offshoot. With an Archive, I put multiple doors in the room, so you could actually loop through them all.
That's awesome.
Gavin, we have 3 more questions for you, and then we will let you go. Again, really appreciate you spend so much time with us today and chatting. 3 more questions. Starlet, do you want to grab the next one?
Sure. So what's next for Gavin Rothery? What exciting things do you have planned?
It's all super secret projects I can't talk about. I've got some with Archive. Like, Archive left me getting signed by some fantastic agents in LA. So I've got some like super Hollywood industry agents now, which is great.
Always good.
So they've introduced me to all kinds of people, and it's sparked up all kinds of conversations, and there's all kinds of stuff being talked about, things being worked on, scripts in development. We'll see. I can't say what any of them are, but they're all very exciting. And my sci-fi is like my big love in entertainment, so everything's basically in that space. So I've got a sci-fi. I'm trying to move out a little bit towards action stuff, because I always love a good action film, and it's something that I feel like you can never have enough sci-fi action films. Like Aliens was my original love.
One of my favorites.
Coming age movie with Aliens. I saw it when I was like 14 years old, and I've since come to understand that there is a psychology in people where there's a formative period of like sort of 14, 15 years old, whatever you're into at that period is the stuff that you will be into for the rest of your life. The music, the movies, like whatever.
All that.
Wow.
100%. Yeah.
For me, that was like Aliens.
Yeah. And you've kind of answered the next one, but Ender, you want to take the next one there?
So I'm actually going to adjust it, because you have answered it really, really well. But I did want to ask, will you be revisiting The Last Man? Will you be expanding on that at all? Or is it perfect for you?
I have a script for a movie for The Last Man. I appreciate you mentioning that, because that was a fun. I have a script for The Last Man that it's not quite finished, but it's nearly finished, and it's something I'd love to do. It's just it keeps coming up. And it's like one of the things that I'm really grateful of is like the team that we've put together for Archive became really good friends with everybody, and me and the producer, like Philip Hurd, like really good friends. And so we talk about things quite a lot. Phil was the producer on Last Man as well. Like, we've known each other for quite a long time. And we've conversations happen about we're actually going to be properly getting together in the next short number of weeks to properly pin down what our next project's going to be together.
Awesome.
That's something that comes up. There's been a bit of chat about maybe doing an Archive 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Very cool.
I'm in for both of those.
Yeah.
Archive is actually, when I was putting Archive together, there is a broader story in the world of Archive, and Archive is a part of a bigger thing that's going on. The story of the movie Archive is half of a a story that hasn't finished. I know that might sound counterintuitive because it ties up so completely at the end of the film, but there are things going on outside the archive world of which the forces involved have an interest of what he was doing in the archive, which have been playing out in the real world in parallel, which are thrown into focus with his archive closing up because there's more information in there that they would need, and there's a whole bunch of things that happen. But it makes sense when you see the second half of the story. There's all kinds of things in the first story that are mentioned and somewhat poked around towards that are actually the other half of the story.
That's exciting.
And what's funny is when I talk to my wife about the film, because I talk to her about the movies that I watch, she doesn't watch all of them, but I mentioned that to her, that there are some stuff that feels like it wasn't complete, which was not a bad thing. It just left it open
threads of ideas that can be pulled on a little bit. Yeah.
So you did really well at making it overt without making it overt.
Yeah.
Thanks, I appreciate that. One thing I will say as well is that if I ever get to tell that second half of the story, one thing I will say is that J2 was much more special than she realized.
Interesting.
Very cool.
Interesting.
Yeah. Ender, we want to grab the last question here before we let Gavin go.
Absolutely. It seems like there's a growing correlation between the game industry and the film industry and television industry. As somebody who obviously has their finger on the pulse of both worlds, do you see a time that these two could collide and mix? Think Ready Player One.
Yeah, I do. It's something that I have conversations going on about. That what I will say is, when you say it like that, it all sounds so lovely and so simple. The reality of it is very, very different for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that there are companies out there, like big entertainment companies, who basically sit on IP. So they'll get IP and they'll just sit on it, and they might never do anything with it. So there are tons of game IPs out there which are just being sat on, and you just can't get near them.
We've seen really interesting tension, sort of almost sometimes between the two industries, where Hollywood tries to make game movies that are a lot of times not successful, but we see a lot of Hollywood directors, step a little bit of their toe into games, which I think has sometimes been more successful. Although even though some of those games never saw the light of day, I'm always thinking.
I'll tell you a little secret, right? I've already written a script for a Wipeout movie.
Oh, cool.
That's never going to get made.
Yeah.
And it's, can I swear?
Yeah.
I don't know if I can swear.
You can swear.
Yeah.
Fucking cool. I've got a fucking cool way into Wipeout.
That would be awesome.
And it's
I just watched a documentary on the Wipeout franchise, believe it or not, about a week ago. That's funny.
It's never going to get made.
Yeah.
Honestly, I've been all around. Yeah. I mean, I've met some great people in these investigations and stuff, but there's a whole bunch of game IPs that I've been, because it's one of those things where, because I've got that, I've got all those, that kind of crossover, you know, I'm in a kind of a weird place. And I think I could be really good, with the right IP, I could really bring it. There are still a couple of things that I'm chasing. They're just a little bit more obscure, but would still be awesome. But it's just so difficult trying to get IP locked down.
I think a great example of that is, here in March, we're finally going to get the Halo TV series, and we know how long that has been in production, going all the way back to the initial time. The initial, I think Neil Blomkamp was going to work on that film, and then whatever. That's a whole other story. But you see how hard sometimes these things are to gestate, and that was just something that stuck out to us when we were kind of thinking up questions. And Ender brought up this question of you having that unique perspective of having a little bit to do with both industries, and we thought that was kind of fascinating. So it's definitely a brave new world for this.
Yeah. It's definitely something I'm chasing.
Yeah.
It's just
awesome.
It is a chase, but I'm not giving up.
Yeah. Well, Gavin, again, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. It was a real pleasure to have you on. Obviously, we took a good chunk, probably an hour and a half of your time tonight.
Thank you.
We talked about a lot of Star Citizen stuff, Moon stuff, Archive stuff. We could have had an entire show probably on Moon and Archive alone, but I didn't want to take any more of your time than was needed. But, obviously on behalf of Starjump, we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us today.
Yeah, no worries. No, it's good. It's Friday night.
That's right.
You know, what else am I going to be doing? Just hanging out in the pub,
There you go.
getting drunk.
Hanging out on Starjump Station. There you go.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks again,
Thank you,
Gavin.
Gavin.
Appreciate it.
Thanks
Yeah,
so much.
thank you. Nice to meet you all.